Welcome to Coaching Uncaged, the podcast on all things coaching, brought to you by Animas. And now introducing your host, Yannick Jacob.
Wonderful. So, Windy Dryden, welcome to the podcast.
Very nice for you to invite me, Yannick.
Well, I've been waiting to talk to you for a little while, and we've touched points in various different occasions, but it never quite got to a conversation. So I'm really looking forward to this. Windy, you've been working in the field of CBT for much longer than I've been alive. Actually, no, not that much longer. About the same time. So when I was born, I was born 1983. So I think you just got into it.
No. I was into it in 1978.
All right.
78.
Right. So I'm on my brother's age.
Yep. So you weren't even thought of at that point.
I wasn't even thought of. Well, coaching was not really thought of at that time. So I got in touch. I think the first time I dived into your work was through a book called Life Coaching that drew heavily on the cognitive behavioral framework, which is a lot of the work that you've been doing. You were Professor Emeritus at Goldsmiths for Psychological Studies. You spend a lot of time helping people develop. Is that true? You've written or edited over 230 books?
262 at the current count, with one more about to come out anytime soon. So let's call it 263, but who's counting?
Who's counting? Yeah. Well, you are, and I thank you for that work. I really appreciate.
I'm the only one who does. So.
Well, I really look. I'm mentioning this because people are listening to this or watching this. It's good to get a sense from where you're talking about, and just the mere stats are impressive and give you a certain kind of authority in the field. I mean, I know you work a little bit more deeply, so I know there's a lot of authority where that comes from. But authority, I mean, there's a lot to offer, a lot that you have to offer, a lot that you've written about. So you've done a lot of coaching work as well, and sometimes the lines can be blurry. So today I'm really excited to explore a particular part of your work, and one that you've been passionate about for the last couple of years, which is single session work, single session therapy. I've heard first about, but also you've translated the concepts into coaching. So single session and one at a time coaching. So I'm really excited to dive deeper into that in a world that is filled with coaching packages and programs. And there's debate whether, session by session work is actually going to be better than package work, but that single sessions can make quite a difference. And so you've developed an approach around that particularly. And I'm really, really curious to talk and dive into that.
Okay.
Anything you would want to add in terms of where you're speaking from? Anything that would be helpful for the audience to know about you?
No, I think we'll probably get into some of the main issues. I think we should talk about what the name single session means and what's some of the issues around that, some of the issues around one at a time, and I'll talk to you about a name that I've been sort of flirting with and the reasons why I may actually favor it at the moment, although I'm not sure the field needs another name for something, but we can talk about that anyway. I'd be interested to get the feedback from your people on your podcast about it. We'll talk about the role of approaches within single session work, because I think got some thoughts on that. So yeah, I think we should in the course of an hour cover the basis. Of course, this is a single session.
Indeed, it is.
Yes.
Yeah. Although with a much less defined goal, this is an exploratory session as such. And as far as I understand, single session work, and we're going to get into that much later, is usually very well defined.
Goal. You may not have a goal, Yannick, but I have a goal.
Oh, do share.
Well, my goal is to kind of, to actually really convey some of the joys of single session work, and maybe deal with some of the queries that your colleagues might have about doing that work, in terms of not only the professional aspects to it, but also some of the financial aspects to it.
And I hope I can be the voice of that kind of community and bring some of these questions in.
Please do.
Probably common misconceptions as well. I mean, I read a lot of your book already on the subject, and a lot of the questions that I had are all answered in there. So I would encourage everybody to go get the book, Single Session Coaching, as part of the Distinctive Feature series. It's very well written, really succinct. It's not very long. So anybody who's interested in that, go to the source, right? But we can make some of that conversational. So I'll probably ask you some questions that have some obvious answers, and sometimes where I know the answer already, just so we can lay it out a bit.
Okay.
Cool. Well, how did you get into it? Why focus a significant part of your time on this work?
Well, I think the background is that historically, I've always believed, when I were giving a training course, whether it would be on therapy or coaching or counseling or whatever, that it was important to not only talk about how to practice, but also demonstrate it. And so over the years, it's approaching, I would have done about 700 demonstration sessions in some shape or form. And if you think about it, those sessions are single sessions. And there are single sessions where it is clear at the outset between my client or my coachee or the volunteer, whatever you like to call the person, that they would be working with me on for only one occasion. And so that is, if you like, a single session coaching or therapy, literally a single session with no possibility of any further. And so I got into it that way. I was looking for a new challenge when I was leaving my job at Goldsmiths, when I was retiring. And it was a toss-up between me getting into single session work or opening up a procrastination clinic. And what led me to conclude that I should really put my efforts into the single session work rather than the procrastination clinic, because I figured out that if I ran a procrastination clinic, I might not get paid, because people might procrastinate on paying me. So,
yeah, I'm gonna go tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll pay you tomorrow. Yeah. And I think I was less easy than I am now for getting paid, before giving a service rather than waiting. But anyway, that was the reason. And when I did that, I went to the literature, and I went back to a book. And I always recommend people, no matter if they're interested in therapy, coaching, or counseling, to actually go to a book which is written by Moishe Talmon, called Single Session Therapy, which he wrote, published by Josie Bass in 1990, because that is the first, I think, book that was really devoted to single session work. And really, when people think about the origins of single session work, they always go back to Moishe Talmon's work. And so I reread that book. I read it in the early 2000s, and I thought it was a very interesting book, but it didn't really grab me.
Sorry, can I jump in with something?
Yeah, sure.
Because I would think that the idea of a single session help, I think at some point I heard Tony Robbins use the word one-stop shop therapist or something like that. And so the idea of like getting some sort of, I don't want to say magic pill, but like having a single session with somebody who just kind of helps you change your life, I would think that that's been around for quite a lot.
Well, yeah, but it hadn't been written about. I don't think Tony Robbins has written about, what's he called it? One-stop shop. Anyway, so it may have been around, but I don't think anybody kind of wrote about it until Talman did. And I think that I resonated with that much more when I read it in 2014 than when I did in 2003, which kind of showed me that often you could be ready for a book or not ready for a book. So ideas that and so I actually then realized that I'd been doing single session work in my demonstrations quite a bit. And so I also was interested in because you'd hear people talk about how long they'd have to wait for counseling or therapy, because for whatever reason, in the IAP service, people, that is heavily assessment oriented, and then on the result of that assessment, the assessor largely, not exclusively, but largely makes a decision about what kind of interventions or what kind of therapeutic program the client is going to kind of go into, and then they have to wait for that. Yeah. But I think what Talman and his colleagues found that and I think this is kind of going forward, certainly therapeutically, when people go for a single session, which means that right from the start, therapy is offered to them the first point of contact. About half of them are satisfied with that and don't go back for more. And I think for coaching, I think, I'm, in the same way as I'm not against longer term work, which would be kind of silly, but I think that there would be a lot of people who might want to have a single session of coaching on a particular issue of development or some obstacle that may have arose in the context of their coaching that the coach may feel that they're not able to deal with. And so, people, although people might want to go sign up for a package, but other people might want to say, no, I just want to see how it goes. I'll come for one session if I like it. I'll come back if I need it. I'll come back if I don't need it. I won't. So I think it caters for that person who actually doesn't want to commit themselves to any sort of longer term work, for better or for worse.
It makes it easier for the client to say yes to this. I think for coaches it's more difficult because on the one hand they earn more when they sell a package, when the client commits. Also, I think coaches generally like it when the client is really committed to the work, which is not saying that the client is not committed to the work when they do a single session. But I think the biggest thing I see in supervision is that coaches come to supervision really stressed out and really under pressure to deliver results in that one session. And I see a tendency that the coach slips into giving lots of advice or taking the lead or just really feeling the pressure of this got to be good today, because otherwise they're not going to come back for one more session or they're not going to be satisfied.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that really kind of says two things about, coaches in the coaching world. One is that there is this, I think, sort of idea that, commitment is about signing up for 10 sessions. I think as you just said, I think you can be committed. I think you can be committed and not committed to single session work, or committed or not committed to ongoing work. So I don't think necessarily that the length of time is going to kind of be determined. But I think that you raise a particular issue here, which is about it's the idea that I as a coach have to deliver something, as opposed to the coachee. Do you use the word coachee? What do you use?
Coachee, client, coaching partner. Okay. As the whole conversation in itself.
Whole conversation in itself. Yeah. that the person, let's call him a person, that the person and the coach are working together on something, and so it's not, it's something which co-creation. And I often say that single session work is not about the end of something, it's about the beginning of something, and but where the person takes away and implements that on their own, and see where they go with it, and if they want sort of further help, they can have it either in that episode or actually later on. And so the idea is that you don't have to take it on yourself, to deliver something and put yourself under pressure, because that's going to mean that if you put yourself under pressure, then you're going to be tense, not very present. The client's going to be tense, and nothing terribly productive is going to go out with it. If you say, well, let's see what's going to happen, because we don't have to. Well, look, the point is, single session coaching and single session therapy is really saying, look, let's see if we can help you today with what you've come for in one session, but if not, further help is available. So it's a bit of a misnomer, single session therapy. And I think one of my colleagues in Australia argues for its retention, because it's sort of like a bit of a wake up call. It actually has interest. If you say single session, that's interesting. What's that? But it doesn't. It means let's kind of work together to see if I can help you with what you've come for today. But if you need further help, that's fine as well. One at a time coaching is kind of more saying, this is going to be an ongoing endeavor, but it's limited for you booking sessions one at a time. And so it's, if you like, anti-package. Although, you could transfer. You might have a session and transfer, but I think this business of actually transferring, and I've seen it a lot in my supervision work, people who haven't really got the single session mindset end up with somehow communicating to the client that they need to come back. And guess what they do, And so it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy, saying, well, single session therapy is not much good because people want to come back all the time. Yes, that's because you've actually, kind of biased it, the unconscious bias, if you like, to use that terminology, that you've actually said that to come back. So it's really quite difficult to hold the ground by actually saying, look, we have one session, let's see if we can help you today. We'll come for, the way to the various ways of ending that session. You could end it by saying, why don't you kind of go away, and if you need to come back, that's fine. Why don't you go away, reflect, digest, put into practice, see what happens, and then come back, or you can make another appointment. If you hold those alternatives as equal, and you don't find a way of biasing the client in any one of those things, that's really consistent with a single session mindset. But it's difficult because people do have their biases.
I want to talk about sorry, go on.
And some people, believe wrongly that it's their failure if the client wants to come back, which is interesting, because previously counselors in particular, or therapists, think it's a failure if the client doesn't want to come back. But single session therapists, if they're not careful, can think it's a failure if the client does want to come back. And that's not the case, because it's about, let's see if we can help you today. If not, further help is available. Further help is available as determined by you when you want it, and determined by us according to what is available in the services. So, I have a package, I have this, that, or the other, or whatever. But it's it's kind of difficult to actually maintain those options in a fair-minded way.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's a lot that we could pick up on here now. First of all, I want to underline that single session, if you treat every session as if it could be your last session, that's quite a powerful mindset. And I'd love to talk about mindset a little bit more. At some point in your book, you write that the mindset is driven by the idea of what would I share with this client if I were to never see them again. And I remember when I read this, I thought, wouldn't that make you prone? I would probably, what would I share with them? It's an invitation to share some piece of knowledge or information or some guidance. I'm sure a lot of people would be very tempted to offer that client something.
Well, if the client's interested in it, I'm not suggesting, and I often say to people, both in therapy and coaching, would you be interested in my take on the subject? And if they say, well, people won't say no, but they'll say no.
Well, who says no to that?
Well, it's no because in the way they say yes. So if somebody says, yeah, I'd really be interested in that, then it's different from them saying, yeah.
No, I mean, if they come to see you for a single session, especially, or this could be my last session as a client with you, and I'm working with somebody I likely look up to, or at least respect enough that I pay them for a single session. So of course I would want to hear what you have to say. Does that mean that there's more sharing or more guidance or more direction offered from the practitioner in single session work?
Well, no, because the work is really really focused on what the client wants to take away from the session. That's the guiding light. It's not, and that the sharing is actually within that context. Knowing that I know where you're going or you want to go. I'm sort of thinking about, well, how can I help you get there?
Yeah.
And of course, what I would share with a client would be different from what you would share with a client. So we're not, and so I think it's important that you kind of indicate that there are, this is one person's take on a subject or an issue.
Yeah.
But it is, I mean, it is really guided by what the client wants to take away. And again, just because you have the idea of what you want the client to take away from the session doesn't mean, that in any given session that's going to happen. You may have some ideas, but I mean, do we share every idea that we have, during a coaching session? No, of course we don't.
Yeah.
It depends upon, the nature of the conversation as it unfolds.
Yeah. And that speaks to the fact that there is a single session, one at a time, is a mode of delivery and also a mindset, but that the approach can vary widely. So if a very kind of directive, mentoring, consulting, teaching kind of coach would do a single session, that would probably look quite different than if a very person-centered coach would deliver a single session.
That's right. I mean, I think that this is what I like about single session, work. It's not an approach. People talk about my approach to single session work. And I do say, well, look, this is just my approach. This is not the approach. I'm not holding what I do out as anything more than, an illustration of how one person goes about, approaching the work. And so, you're right that you can bring, but I think the good, the effective single session coaches and therapists are those that are, have their idea about how they would want to approach things, but with given people, they don't actually do it because it wouldn't be helpful. I mean, I was doing a session earlier and because I work for an organization called Square Health, and which is an organization that offers 30-minute sessions or conversations to people who are insured by Aviva and Help at Hand, and they come along, and so you know, I offered this person a perspective on guilt, which went down, you know, like a lead balloon. So I dropped it, you know, because he didn't find it helpful, which is fine, you see. And I think that as long as you are prepared to be flexible and drop things and actually, you know, and say, well, look, this is not helpful. And so I'm not going to, you know, I'm not going to use it for this person. So I think that is really an important way forward.
It seems to me then that particularly CBT or cognitive behavioral work, whether that's coaching therapy, seems to lend itself quite well to a single session approach compared to, for example, very person-centered, very client-led. I mean, CBT is also very client-led in terms of objective, but I think I also remember you writing that the practitioner makes some decisions of how to get there. And given that in CBT and CBC, there's so much research on what kind of intervention works for, let's say, procrastination, it seems to lend itself really well to single session compared to other approaches.
Well, yes and no, because I think that the important aspect of single session work, it's very client driven. Mm-hmm. It's the client is saying, this is what I want to gain from this session. Now, that doesn't mean that you as a counselor or coach might have some doubts or reservations about, you know, what they say. An obvious one is somebody with anorexia wants help with losing weight. I mean, you know, that's a sort of a very extreme example, but, you know, I'm not going to say yes to that. But,
yeah, you want an ongoing process for that kind of work.
Yeah, exactly. So, or actually, you know, the actual kind of, you know, to kind of indicate that the actual, sometimes what the person wants is part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And I think it's important for the coach or the counselor or the therapist to actually to be honest about that, because one of the things I want to make the point about is that, you know, this work is very transparent. You're very clear about what you can do, what you can't do, what you will do, what you won't do, as a practitioner. So it's very much client, you know, sort of, you know, driven, and the you know, there are different things that you can, you know, the way I look at it, this, you know, let's suppose you want to go to Glasgow, right? That's your thing, but you've got loads of different ways of getting there. You know, you can fly, you can go by train, you can walk, you can run, you can take an Uber. You know, I suppose you could even find some way of going by sea. But you know,
I want one of those little tiny clown cycles.
Or a clown cycle. Yeah, exactly. So the thing is that the approach, you know, let's suppose I like you know, therapy by clown cycles. Well, we're not everybody.
No, here's an approach.
Nobody wants that, you know what I mean? And so that in a way, although I have written a book on single session integrated CBT for therapists, I mean, I you know, throughout that book, I made the point that you know, you're drawing upon CBT as a resource, and that doesn't mean you can't draw upon other approaches as resource, you know, for clients, you know, who seem to fit. So we're not trying to kind of put everybody into the single session cognitive behavioral coaching box, but to use that that resource if it makes sense to somebody. Now, maybe, I don't know, I mean, I know that, you know, my colleague David Lane is sort of, you know, kind of trying to make the point. I don't know how widespread this idea, but he argues that it's important for coaches to actually start with the formulation. So, I mean, maybe I can ask you a question. How prevalent is formulation driven coaching?
It really depends on the coach. When I see coaches working with formulations, usually they have a significant amount of expertise in whatever field they're dealing with, so that they feel in a position where they can offer a formulation of what's going on here. And
well, I think that single session work is, I've got nothing against, formulation or taking a history or doing an assessment or doing whatever. But these activities are not easily compatible with single session work. You're not necessarily it's not a good way of spending your time in a single session doing a case history or doing a formulation, however worthy these activities are. Mm-hmm. And so I think CBT therapists, stroke coaches would struggle if they brought to the work the idea that I have to develop a formulation first before I actually do the work, because that's not the best way of getting the most out of single session work. Single session work is saying, let's start coaching, let's start therapy, let's start kind of working from moment one, right? Because let me help you to get what you want to take away from moment one.
Yeah, and the outcome is not necessarily that you solve the person's procrastination within that session, but that the client walks away with a clear plan on how to move forward.
Yes. So, yes, of course. With people who procrastinate, they always want to put it in practice tomorrow anyway. So, no, but that's right. I mean, again, people. And the other thing is that, I've often asked, what would you do in single session with, and they kind of name with somebody who procrastinates or somebody with this or that. And I say, what's the person's name and what do they want to take from the session? In other words, my answer is, let's personalize that. Let's not utilize labels or diagnostic, labels or actually problem-based labels or anything like that. Let's take what Margaret wants to, take away from the first session, and can I help Margaret do that? And then, we can find out at the end what happens. Because another issue, I don't know whether this would be as relevant in coaching as it is in therapy. And the question is, who is suitable for single session coaching, right? And my answer is always, let me do the single session and we'll find out if that person is suitable. I don't know. You don't know. They don't know. So all we know, and what's important to do, is to move forward with an ethical, informed consent based on the client's understanding of what's on offer, and based on your agreement as well that you want to proceed on this particular basis. Right. And I say that because a lot of people, particularly who work for universities, are coming under pressure to actually work within a single session way. And my argument is that nobody should be pressured into single session work, albeit whether it is the therapist, coach, or the client. It really needs to be entered into voluntarily, kind of based on an understanding of what we're about to do.
Yeah, let me jump in there, because that's definitely one of the things I was very interested in. Is I'm assuming you wouldn't do a consultation or a chemistry call, because you would just jump into a session, and then after that session, you'd figure out whether the client is suitable for single session work or not.
Yes, that's right. And often, I think this is a very under-researched area, which is the free session, or because a lot of the people who often offer free sessions, they offer half an hour, chemistry call. And I think we need to understand a lot more about what goes into those sessions. I think that's an interesting area of research. So I wouldn't do any of that, right? Because the time that I could be spending doing a chemistry call, I could be doing a coaching call.
Yeah. And often people come away from a chemistry call and their problem is already solved, or at least they have a way forward, and then they don't sign up for coaching in the first place.
You're giving it away for nothing.
Yeah, well, the argument is that there's plenty of other problems. If that was really helpful, what else could I solve with this kind of relationship? And I guess
but
that's
they may not want to.
They may not want to.
Yeah. So I think this is it is certainly an under discussed, under researched area. I personally wouldn't do that. I might have a quick call about explaining what single session is, what it isn't, but I wouldn't get into the chemistry.
Well, you also have the benefit of a 50-year career with 267 books. So
people who come to me may not know that. I'm just Windy Dryden. You see, I mean, I was looking. Somebody I was talking to, again with Square Health. They needed an EMDR, so I said that I do some sort of phoning around for them. So I rang somebody up and I said, "This is Windy Dryden. I don't know if you've heard of me." And I said, "No." And so even therapists have never heard of me. So clients, may not have heard of me, and so I don't think that's a consideration.
Right. Well, you distinguish between problem-focused single session work and developmental-focused single session work, and I think that's quite an important distinction. I just wanted to talk about a little bit because usually developmental work is seen by most coaches as, well, that's a journey, right? How can you do that in a single session, or how can you set that up? So maybe we can get a bit more tangible. Maybe we can talk about Margaret, or I think you mentioned a guy called Harry, or whoever, a real client or imagined client you can.
I'm not talking about real clients. We'll talk about imagined clients.
Yeah, fair play. I mean, obviously you draw on your work with real clients that just kind of become one. But how might we imagine the process? So no consultation, you jump into a session. How can we imagine that going? Because you have to build the relationship very quickly, and you have to very quickly find out what is the defined objective here. And so how can we imagine that, such a journey?
Well, you ask them.
What's that?
You ask them at the outset.
What's the first thing you ask?
Take away?
Yeah.
Well, it may not be the first thing I might ask is, from your perspective, what's the purpose of our conversation today? So to make sure that they're in the right place. The second thing I might ask is that, if at the end of the day you reflected on our conversation that we're going to have, and you were really pleased about what you took away from it, what would you have taken away? So, and so something like that, which really kind of indicates that we're actually kind of moving towards, something. And so, I mean, in terms of the relationship, I think. Look, I mean, I always sort of, refer to. I think I've written about it in coaching as well. The Coaching Alliance. I don't know if you've seen that book, Coaching Alliance.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of really the application of working alliance theory that Ed Baldwin, first brought out in 1979 to the coaching arena. And I think that the one of the strong. I think if you halfway decent, if you listen to people, if you're nice to people, that you
have rapport quickly.
Yeah, you actually have rapport kind of quickly. But I think the best way of actually getting rapport with somebody is to really you and them kind of working out where they want to go, what the focus is going to be, and and actually start work towards that. That they feel listened to, they feel understood, and they kind of feel that you haven't got an agenda.
Yeah.
You're not there to sell them a package or to do what. You're quite there to help them. But some people may want packages, and that's fine. I'm not against packages.
Yeah.
I'm against the uniform application of packages.
Yeah, and there's
I'm against single session therapy when it's something you can only have this one session and nothing more.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you ask somebody, what are we here for today? What would be a good outcome? Or, at the end of the day, you think back and think that was a great, really useful session. and then they start telling you their life story, or they really paint a huge picture. They draw on complex circumstances in the situation that they're facing, or they go into storytelling. I would imagine that due to, you know, having very limited time, do you interrupt? Do you contract around that? How do you manage that?
Well, I mean, you know, I think the various ways of doing it. One way of doing it is I might say to somebody at the beginning, I said, look, there may be times during our conversation that I need to interrupt you to help us to keep on track. Mm-hmm. Do I have your permission to do that? Mm-hmm. And, you know, how might I best do that? People often say, well, just say, you know, can you stop a minute, or just, you know, hold your hand up. And so I'm guided by, you know, by them in terms of the best way I can interrupt them. Mm-hmm. Because people are very reluctant to interrupt people, I found in this field, you know. Mm-hmm. So
many people have been told not to.
Yes, indeed. In fact, many people, you know, and I think that's one of the things about you know training, which hopefully we'll come to at some point, you know, in our conversation. But I might say, well, look, you know, given the fact that you know, this is what you want to take away, what do you think it's essential for me to know about you that will enable me to help you to achieve that today? And so I will sort of, or I will really try to extract from them, you know, some of the key issues. And don't forget, the other thing is that you know, depending upon the context in which you're doing this work, one of the important things is the pre-session questionnaire, which I encourage people to fill out to prepare for the session, mm-hmm. and which they then return to me if they choose to, and so I can prepare for the session.
What sort of questions do you ask?
In the you know, like you know, what has led you to make the appointment today? What do you hope to get from the appointment? Mm-hmm. You know, what attempts have you made to deal with the issue before? What the, you know, that kind of stuff. So that they're starting to kind of think about things. Mm-hmm. Now, the interesting thing is, before the pandemic, I used to do this in my private practice because there was a distinction between face-to-face work. Because at the time, if you said to the field, you know, you're going to be doing all your work by Zoom, we would have said, yeah, right, you know, no chance. Now, you know, we're moving. You know,
it's quite common, yeah.
It's quite common. But so before the pandemic, I made a distinction between a pre-session telephone conversation that I had with people, which is interactive, which was to help them to prepare for the session. Mm-hmm. And when I did that, about between 15 and 20% were helped by that short 20 to 30 minute conversation, because it was interactive. That's less likely, much less likely now. They are filling out a questionnaire, mm-hmm. Which I think the questionnaire is probably more time effective and cost effective for people than if I was going to add on to the cost of it. You know.
So the work already starts before they come to the session.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The work starts before, when they actually choose to come and see me. Mm-hmm. And that's the interesting thing, is that sometimes I like to find out, you know, what was the point that said, look, I'd like to go and see Windy Dryden, or I'd like to go and see a coach or a therapist.
Yeah.
That point.
Why now?
Well, not why now, but why then?
Yeah.
Well, why did I choose it to come here now then?
Yeah, that makes sense. Right. So building rapport quite quickly kind of comes quite naturally if you're really tuned into people, as a little bit of contracting, but, you know, not extensively. Pre-questionnaire that gets people to focus in, really setting clear objectives for the work.
I also have a coaching contract, which I ask people to sign before mm-hmm. they actually come. So which indicates, you know, the kind of things that I want them to know about my practice, the kind of the exceptions, the confidentiality, things like that. And I won't see them unless they've signed it.
Right. Well, what else is in there? Confidentiality exceptions make sense. It always winds me up when coaches say everything here is 100% confidential, because it really shouldn't
obviously
be.
It's not. Of course not. Yeah. What else is in there? How to pay me. What kind of cancellation policy I have. Once we've agreed to work one another. That's important because a lot of people, and what exceptions to the cancellation policy there are. And I have a exception if you are hospitalized, or your loved ones are hospitalized, or I'm hospitalized, or my loved ones you don't have to pay me. But if any other reason, it can be 48 hours, depending on when they make the appointment, you don't have to pay me. I think if you're very clear and upfront, then people, you could just say them, we'll have a look at the contract you said.
Yeah. So that's mostly logistical. Is there something in there about the nature of the work?
I can't remember off the top of my head. Probably. Yeah, probably.
Right. So they have a bit of an understanding of, like, for example, don't expect all of your problems to be solved by the end of the session.
I wouldn't put it quite like that. But,
yeah, I figured you might reframe that a little.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So there is some, there is, and I think that is part of the session. Some people, the purists, say no, it's not. You're having it's a bit like contact, outside, and of course there's evaluation afterwards. Again, the purists would say no, it's not, because you've now got three points of contact. And so I don't know. I mean, I think the purists in single session work are in the minority. So yeah, you've got the contract, you've got the questionnaire for them to fill out, and work starts certainly before you actually kind of see them. But it's important to check out, just because they've said they want to focus on this in the pre-session questionnaire, it's still important that you should check it out, because people do change their minds.
Yeah. So then you're on your way, you're in the session, you've done a bit of contracting, you're clear on what the objective is. Particularly, I thought to myself as I was reading this, with developmental goals, they struck me as often much more complex. So I wonder how you can refocus a conversation, or how can manage a conversation when it's clear they want to get to Manchester, but then they have to look at, how can I fix my car, or how can I make money for the train, or how can I get in good health so I can walk or try that clown cycle. I wonder how you can
that's dealing with it. Well, I think that's dealing with, I mean, look, apart from the fact that okay, why do you want to get to Manchester? Why Manchester? Why not Birmingham? What's so important about Manchester? Looking at the kind of the relationship to their goals and their values and things like that, then I think that then you can actually look at some of the obstacles. And I think that when somebody comes with a clear developmental objective and there are no obstacles, one wonders why they're coming to see me. Often it's like they want to hear it out loud, so that they can say, yeah, fine. But I might say, can you imagine anything happening that might lead you to kind of not embark on that journey, or might sort of help you to get stuck after you've made start on that journey, and then you can actually start looking at the obstacles. Now, the obstacles are either practical obstacles or emotional obstacles. That's why I think coaches, I think my view is that coaches do need to have some understanding of what, the emotional obstacles that, their clients are likely to actually experience before, I mean, otherwise you'll be referring somebody to a different person every 5 minutes, which and so, I think you have to be clear about what you can deal with, what you can't deal with. And there's an article which I refer to in the book done by the Australian guy.
Kavanagh,
yeah, Michael Kavanagh, that makes clear what his views are about the kind of emotionally based issues that coaches should deal with and advisedly or ideally should not deal with.
Mm-hmm.
That's important for you too.
Could you give us an example of a scenario that maybe started quite complex, or at least seemingly complex, that you were then able to boil down to a specific focus that you can then follow focus the session on?
By complex, how do you mean?
I don't know if somebody knows they want to get to Manchester, and Manchester, maybe that example doesn't work out well. Somebody wants to, let's say, get a different job, quit their job that they hate, and start a job that they're really passionate about. And then there is this web of different emotions that are holding them back, and stuff from their past, and stuff from their present, and stuff from their last job. And then, there's so many factors that play into why they might not quit their job. I imagine you'd have to be quite skilled to distill it down to what's the emotional obstacle here that would really get this guy unlocked or this person unlocked.
Well, there are I think there's certainly different ways of actually doing that. You might ask them, if we could deal with the main obstacle that if we dealt with that would actually get you started.
Mm-hmm.
There may be other obstacles kind of there, but this one, if you dealt with that, it will get you started. Then that's where to go. You might say, what conditions would you need in place in order to start this journey?
Right. So identify one thing that you start with that feels the most important to get rid of. It doesn't mean that there's any others.
When you think about the issues that you have in mind, can you see any theme that actually unites them?
Mm-hmm.
And they might say, what do you mean? I say, well, some people's examples are kind of, wrapped up with, the unifying theme might be self-worth issues, or, might be, sort of, issues to do with loss or threat, So, or you might ask them, are there any particular emotions that you might experience that might be? So I think if you have a different ways of, in asking that question, what I'm doing is I'm actually using an REBT framework, which says that emotional obstacles, have both
REBT, rational emotive behavioral
therapy, has both rational emotive behavioral coaching, if you like, has both emotional components and the kind of components that relate to sort of adversities, what type of adversities. So you might say, are there particular types of adversities which we need to really focus on today to deal with? If we dealt with those, then it would free you to actually start your journey towards Manchester. So you could actually look at. I think there are a variety of ways of actually kind of approaching the same issue. And again, you might be able to, if you have a number of things in mind, if one doesn't work, you've got another one.
Yeah. We've mentioned quite a few emotional obstacles, procrastination. Some of this stuff is traditionally seen as, that's what therapists do. And many coaches are being faced with those things coming into the coaching room, single session or not. Where do you see the line, if you still see it, because you're obviously steeped in both practices, between coaching and therapy?
Well, I think one of the ways of drawing the line is to follow Michael Kavanagh's approach. That if something is more chronic than acute, as long lasting, as entrenched in the person's life, then that's probably not the territory that the coaches would feel terribly comfortable in actually deal with, unless they have the training and the skills. But I think Michael Neenan, my colleague, would argue that virtually all coaching involves dealing with some obstacles. In every coaching contract, you're dealing with obstacles, and I think that I can't really conceive of training a coach, for just when the journey is smooth.
Yeah, it's not about when the journey is smooth, but I think it's about when the obstacle is. What if coaching, or my coaching rather, your coaching, the coaching approach of the coach in question is not the best tool, or not conducive to, or not a good match for dealing with this particular obstacle. And
well, I think again, the more open-minded you are, the more kind of things that you can draw upon, the more you are prepared to actually ask the client, from your perspective, what would be the best way of tackling this obstacle, so you actually bring them into it as well. So I think that the more flexible, the more pluralistic you can be as a coach, the more that you can do that. But if somebody wants a very particular approach to dealing with obstacles, which I don't have, and I really, and so I'll say, look, this is outside of my skill set. So I'll look for somebody who has that particular skill set. But I think, again, if you're open-minded and flexible, you'll be able to deal with most obstacles in different ways.
And I think that goes to show also that single session work is really helpful, because if somebody signs up for 10 sessions and after the first session, the coach is, I don't think I can help you with that. I think this is something that's much better dealt with on a weekly basis with somebody who has much deeper knowledge about psychology. That has a much different effect on the client than if you have one session and afterwards the coach might signpost to who might be the best person to work with, or to continue what you started in this session.
Yeah, I mean, for example, let's again, you will be better placed to know this than me. That let's go back to the coaching package. Okay, is that something that somebody has to pay for in advance?
Often, but it really depends on the coach. Many coaches would ask you, because then you're committed, even if the going gets tough. Somebody's not going to drop out. But I don't ask all my clients to pay up front unless commitment is going to be part of the work.
Right, but what if you pay for a package, right, and you're so happy with the first session, you don't need to come back for the rest of the package? Would you get a refund?
Well, I know a coach who says, I charge for results, I don't charge for sessions. We anticipate 6. You don't get more than 6. But if we solve it in one session, then you paid for the result. I see that backfiring on a lot of coaches that feel huge responsibility for delivering the results in the sessions that are available. But if you use one session and you solve a huge problem, then I guess you have 5 more sessions in the bank that you can solve other huge problems.
Or they may.
Or you offer a refund.
You offer a refund, or they may have it in the bank. They may actually, and actually, one of the things is that in the single session world is that if you say to somebody, we have one session only, it's a different psychology. And if you say to somebody, look, more is available should you need it.
Yeah.
And so you kind of leave not needing to go back because you can.
Yeah, and it's powerful. I think the clients are much more likely to bring up the real stuff. It's like the door in hand principle, that on the way out of the session, at the very end, somebody opens a huge door that puts everything into perspective. And I think in single session work, that's much more likely to surface much earlier.
Yeah, if they know that they've, that you're going to try to help them.
Yeah,
because I think what we're trying to do in the single session work is to get down to work and get down to the nitty gritty, get down to what's, what's nearly, we want to kind of cut out all the flim and all the flam, want to get kind of cracking.
Any special tips from somebody who's been doing this for half a century in terms of, I don't know, I don't want to ask you about powerful questions, but maybe you have some, who knows? Any advice for a coach who'd like to go into the nitty gritty and cut through the fluff?
Well, there's lots of questions you can ask. What's really important for us to deal with today. As I said earlier, at the end of the session, what would have made this, something that you were really pleased that you had. And also checking out as the session goes, that the client is still talking about what they want to talk about, making sure that not only that you start off with a focus, but you keep on track, and that any changes to that is agreed, and that you might you're not doing that because that sounds really interesting, or you've got some idea about what the client should be dealing with, which is not necessarily what the client does want to deal with. I think that staying on the same page is, I think, important, and also to realize that that this is just another. I mean, some people, I've seen it because I looked at some people's advertising on their website, and they kind of talk about a breakthrough session. And I think that puts needless pressure on people.
Oh yeah,
we're gonna break through something. But if you don't, so I mean, I think it's important to kind of recognize what you need, how you portray what you do. And also there's the interesting thing about time. Some people think that, one session will give more time. I don't think that necessarily is the case. I think if you're, what I often say to people, both in coaching and single session work, is that I say we have up to 50 minutes. We might be finished earlier. If we are finished earlier, let's not spoil things by talking about the weather for 10 minutes, and undermining the impact of what we've achieved. So, you can actually, kind of, time is an important factor. If you and your client know you've only got this, this amount of time, then it does concentrate the mind. I often talk about what human beings are capable of by talking about a guy called Rod Temperton. Do you know who Rod Temperton was?
No.
Rod Temperton was a man from Grimsby, a white guy from Grimsby, who joined a soul group called Heatwave, and wrote virtually all of their songs. And when they were splitting up, he was invited by what's his name, the guy who was connected to Michael Jackson. It will come to me, but to write for Michael Jackson. And Rod Temperton wrote Thriller. Thriller. Now, Thriller, probably the best-selling single of all time. Now, there's a bit in Thriller where they've engaged Vincent Price to come up with some, to talk some verses in his horror voice. Darkness reigns across.
I remember. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, the story is this: that having decided to ask Vincent Price to do it, and he agreed to do it, Rod Temperton gave himself a whole morning to write 3 or 4 verses, and he was good at that, so that was fine. So at 9 o'clock he sat down, and at 9 o'clock precisely, a doorbell went, and it was his manager. Rod Temperton had forgotten to put their 4-hour meeting, which he couldn't get out. So he's there till 1 o'clock. He then gets into the car and drives to the studio, arrives at 1:30, sees Vincent Price getting out of his car for the 2 o'clock appointment, because they need to kind of do tests. At 1:30, he still hasn't written anything, right? And so he has half an hour to write verses for Thriller. And he does, because he's got half an hour to do it.
Yeah.
So human beings, under the right circumstances, are capable of great things in a short period of time.
Yeah. Some people paralyze us, other people, it gets the best out of them.
Exactly. And I think that, single session, if you're gonna get paralyzed, you don't become a single session coach. But if you can actually utilize that, and utilize and inspire the client, to auto utilize that, I think then that's a great way of actually being as a single session.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, talking of time, we said we're going to aim for an hour. We're about at an hour. I do want to ask you one more question, and it makes sense thematically, because I'm curious about action plans, because they seem to have a particular importance in single session work, depending on the coaching approach, obviously, but it seems to be particularly important in single session work that you do set a good action plan with people, because you might never see them again. That accountability isn't there, that refining the plan.
Yeah, I think a good action plan is broad as opposed to specific homework assignments. I think they're broad, and you might kind of discuss about different ways of implementing. The client has they need to be integrated into the client's life. Otherwise, long term, they ain't going to do it. So I think that kind of integration into the client's life is important. The kind of the when and the how often is important to do it. But that again needs to be integrated into the client's life. And also dealing with any obstacles that the client might experience in order to do the action plan. And so I think good action plans are ways that implement the client's takeaways from the coaching session, because that's one of the things. What's the takeaway for you, and how you're going to implement that is kind of the language that we're using in single session.
How long would you set aside from creating the action plan? I think you work with 50 minutes, no?
Up to 50 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it's longer than others. I don't think it needs to be that long. I think what you're doing is actually helping the person to take away a concept, an idea, which as long as they can kind of think of specific ways of implementing it, there are a number of ways. You don't have to get too locked into to get them to kind of commit themselves to to specific, as you might do in with a homework task rather than sort of action plans. Let me just end, if I may, on just really kind of asking some feedback from your listeners. We talk about single session therapy, and that it kind of conjures up the idea that it is one session, but it's not. The one at a time approach, one at a time coaching, conjures up the idea that you could only have one session at a time. Right? The name I've come up with. Actually, I wanted to come up with now therapy.
Maltherapy.
Yeah, but I looked on the internet. There's a person who's got a sort of website of the website is now therapy.
Oh, is it N for November? Now?
Yeah, NOW. Now.
Okay, I thought like maltherapy, like malpractice.
No. Now, NOW. Anyway, she said that she wouldn't be happy if I did that. That's fair enough. Don't infringe on anybody's well-being. So I've come up with the idea. It's called 1+ therapy, or 1+ coaching. Now, the 1 is in capitals and the plus is in lowercase. What that means is, let's see if we can help you in 1, but more help is available, plus. That would be interesting to see what your listeners have got to say.
Yes.
About 1+ coaching.
I really like the sound of it. I'm not sure about the capital and then lowercase, but that's just for me aesthetically. I think the name really works. And I'd love to hear the feedback as well. If anybody's listening to this or watching this, how can they let you know? Obviously, you can comment on any kind of platform that you're on currently, but
they can write to me at windy@windydryden.com.
Fantastic. Is there anything else that you want to let people know? Anything
if
that
they want some single session coaching sessions, write to me at Windy.
Fantastic. Windy Dryden.com. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Yannick.
And speak to you soon, I hope.
Thanks for listening to Coaching Uncaged. If you want to find out more about becoming a coach, developing your coaching skills further, or training as a coaching supervisor, then head along to animascoaching.com. Thanks again and catch you on the next episode.